You tell yourself this time will be different. You wake up motivated. You make the plan. You promise yourself you're finally going to change. You'll become more disciplined, more focused, more emotionally stable. You'll stop wasting time, stop overthinking, stop disappearing back into the same habits that keep quietly ruining your life. But 3 days later, you're back there again, scrolling instead of working, avoiding the difficult conversation, ignoring the opportunity you once prayed for. Returning to patterns you already know will leave you empty. And eventually, a disturbing question begins to emerge. What if the problem is not the world around you? What if the obstacle is something happening inside you? In The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest explores one of the most uncomfortable realities of human psychology. The mind often sabotages the very life it claims to want. But beneath that idea lies something even deeper. Self-sabotage is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that part of you is still trying to survive. And suddenly, the struggle looks different. Because the mountain standing in front of your life may actually be the version of yourself you never fully understood. Most people think self-sabotage is laziness, lack of discipline, weakness, a motivation problem. But Wiest argues something far more unsettling. The human nervous system values familiarity more than happiness. Even painful patterns can feel psychologically safe if they are known. A person raised in emotional chaos may unconsciously recreate chaos because peace feels unfamiliar. Someone repeatedly criticized may procrastinate because failure feels safer than genuine effort, followed by rejection. Someone abandoned in the past may pull away from intimacy before another person gets the chance to leave first. From the outside, these behaviors look irrational, but internally, they are protective. The mind is constantly asking, what keeps me emotionally safe? Not, what helps me become fulfilled? And this is why so many people remain trapped inside cycles they consciously want to escape. Because awareness alone does not dissolve conditioning. You can understand a pattern intellectually and still remain emotionally imprisoned by it. And perhaps that is one of the hardest truths of adulthood. Knowledge does not automatically become transformation. Wiest's central metaphor is deceptively simple. The mountain is built from everything you refuse to feel. Every grief you buried beneath productivity. Every resentment swallowed to keep the peace. Every humiliation you pretended did not hurt. Every moment you said, "I'm fine," while slowly disconnecting from yourself. Nothing truly disappears. The mind buries what the body continues carrying. And over time, unresolved emotion begins shaping behavior from underneath consciousness itself. Anxiety becomes constant background noise. Restlessness follows you into quiet rooms. You become uncomfortable with stillness because stillness removes distraction. Many people believe they are afraid of failure, but often they are afraid of finally hearing themselves clearly. That is why some people stay permanently busy. Noise protects them from confrontation. But eventually, the emotional pressure begins leaking outward. Through impulsive decisions, self-destructive habits, emotional withdrawal, anger, numbness, overconsumption, exhaustion. What we refuse to feel does not vanish. It waits, like pressure beneath the earth. And eventually, the mountain becomes impossible to ignore. One of the most painful human experiences is recognizing a destructive pattern while still feeling powerless to stop it. You know the behavior is harming you, yet somehow you repeat it again. That contradiction creates enormous shame. But Wiest encourages a different response: observation instead of condemnation. Because every act of self-sabotage contains information. The real question is not, what is wrong with me? The real question is, what emotional state am I trying to avoid? Pay attention to the moment before the sabotage, before procrastination, before distraction, before emotional withdrawal. What feeling appears first? Fear of failure? Fear of success? Fear of being judged? Fear of becoming visible? Many people say they want transformation, but transformation threatens identity, and identity is where the nervous system feels safest. The perfectionist delays finishing because completion creates exposure. The people pleaser avoids honesty because rejection feels dangerous. The avoider stays vague because commitment introduces uncertainty. The chaotic person creates drama because peace feels emotionally unfamiliar. And the tragedy is not that these patterns exist. The tragedy is how many people spend their lives mistaking survival mechanisms for personality. One of the most powerful ideas in The Mountain Is You is the distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. Loss, rejection, failure, embarrassment, grief. No human life escapes these things, but suffering is what the mind builds afterwards. Pain says, "That hurt." Suffering says, "This proves I am unworthy." Pain says, "I failed." Suffering says, "I will never become anything." And slowly, the mind constructs an identity around temporary experiences. A breakup becomes proof of unlovability. A mistake becomes proof of inadequacy. A rejection becomes proof of limitation. The event itself passes, but the psychological story continues for years. And often, it is the story that causes the deepest damage. Wiest suggests something radically simple. Feel the emotion before building the narrative. Feel the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the stomach, the heat behind the eyes, without immediately turning the feeling into identity. Because emotions move when they are fully felt. They become trapped when they are resisted. And perhaps maturity is not becoming emotionless. Perhaps maturity is learning how to feel deeply without becoming psychologically consumed by the feeling. Most self-sabotage happens fast. A trigger appears, and the body reacts before awareness catches up. You reach for the phone, send the message, abandon the routine, escape into distraction. Not because you are weak, but because your nervous system learned reactivity before it learned regulation. Wiest proposes something profoundly practical. Pause. Notice the urge. Stop moving for a moment. Then ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Not what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Loneliness, fear, embarrassment, jealousy, exhaustion. Then comes the crucial step. Allow the emotion to exist without immediately obeying it. That tiny interruption changes everything. Because self-sabotage is usually a loop. Trigger, impulse, behavior, shame, repeat. Awareness inserts space into the cycle, and within that space, choice begins to return. Over time, this changes the relationship you have with yourself. You stop becoming a passenger inside your emotional storms. You learn how to remain conscious while the storm moves through you. That is real self-mastery. Not perfection, presence. Many people are waiting to feel confident before they change their lives. But confidence usually arrives afterwards, not before. Wiest argues that self-trust is built through evidence. Tiny acts of integrity, repeated consistently. Waking up when you said you would, keeping the promise, taking the walk, finishing the work, speaking honestly when it would be easier to stay silent. Every small act says, I can rely on myself. And the opposite is also true. Every ignored intuition, every abandoned commitment, every act of self-betrayal quietly fractures trust internally. Eventually, people stop believing themselves entirely. They no longer trust their discipline, their consistency, their instincts. And without self-trust, even opportunity becomes frightening, because deep down, they fear they cannot sustain the life they claim to want. This is why transformation rarely begins dramatically. It begins quietly, with one honest decision repeated long enough to become identity. A person does not suddenly become disciplined. They become someone who stops abandoning themselves daily. One of the deepest insights in "The Mountain Is You" is that growth often involves grief. Not grief for another person, grief for an old version of yourself, because self-sabotage frequently intensifies right after progress. Life becomes calmer, and suddenly anxiety appears. Success arrives, and procrastination returns. A healthy relationship forms, and emotional withdrawal begins. Why? Because transformation threatens identity, and identity, even painful identity, can feel emotionally safe. The struggling version of you, the invisible version, the wounded version, the version organized around survival. At some point, healing requires letting those identities go, and that can feel strangely painful, because even suffering becomes familiar when you have carried it long enough. Wiest encourages compassion during this process, not self-hatred, not war against yourself. Compassion. Thank the old patterns for what they once protected you from. Then recognize they are no longer needed, because the goal is not to destroy yourself. The goal is to become conscious enough to outgrow what no longer serves you. By the end of "The Mountain Is You", self-mastery no longer feels like perfection. It feels like awareness. You notice the pattern earlier. You pause faster. You recover quicker. You stop collapsing into every difficult emotion. And slowly, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and begin asking, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" And from that moment, the pattern begins weakening. Because once awareness enters the pattern begins losing unconscious control. And maybe that is what the mountain was always for. Not punishment, preparation. The emotional weight you once thought would destroy you becomes the very thing that deepens you. The struggle becomes wisdom. The pain becomes clarity. The mountain becomes perspective. And perhaps self-mastery is not the elimination of darkness. Perhaps it is learning how to remain conscious while walking through it. Maybe the real tragedy is not that human beings struggle. Struggle is part of being alive. Perhaps the tragedy is how many people spend their lives believing the struggle means they are broken. But the mountain was never proof of failure. It was the place awareness was waiting to emerge. And maybe that is the real work of a human life. Not becoming flawless, not transcending difficulty, but becoming a little more conscious than you were yesterday, a little more honest, a little more present, a little less controlled by unconscious fear. The world may remain uncertain. The past may still echo sometimes. The mind may still wander back toward old patterns. But beneath all of that noise, something deeper remains possible. Awareness, alignment, wholeness, and perhaps, one quiet decision at a time, the mountain that once blocked your path slowly becomes the ground you stand on.